So without further ado, I'm just going to line up here Maddox's spotlight video, and I will screen share. Just want to make sure I should be able to do that. And then I'll ask Maddox to speak right after this.
My name is Maddox Swenson. I'm the founder, general partner of L2 Ventures. We focus on investments in high growth companies within the cannabis industry, primarily in the technology and infrastructure verticals, as well as branded consumer products companies. Our current portfolio includes LeafLink, the country's largest B2B marketplace that connects nearly 6,000 retail cannabis dispensaries with nearly 2,000 cannabis branded products companies, and facilitates north of 40% of total wholesale cannabis commerce in the country. Our second portfolio company is Caliper Foods. Caliper Foods makes cannabinoid formulations for food and beverage, and they have a popular consumer brand called Caliper CBD, which is a water-soluble THC powder that has 5 to 10x the absorption of traditional formats such as oil-soluble or oil tinctures. Fourth portfolio company is Stillwater Brands. This is a sister company to Caliper Foods, which operates a similar business in the THC vertical, currently operating within Colorado and Michigan today, but expanding nationally over the next 12 to 24 months. Our third portfolio company is Calibre. Calibre is a company that focuses on building technology to produce cannabinoids, CBD, THC, CBG, and others via biosynthesis and fermentation. If anyone has any interest in learning more about L2V, I'd be happy to connect.
All right, thank you for that spotlight video, Maddox. So I'll start off by just asking, could you point out, and you mentioned your key portfolio companies, could you point out some of the trends you've seen kind of at a high level in terms of how some of these companies are developing, especially during kind of the COVID period? There wasn't as much deal flow and announcements and closings, but I think on the technology side, there were significant developments. So if you could give us a landscape of what you're seeing, that'd be a great point to start from.
Sure, happy to. And as I kind of go into it, folks, if you have questions, want to make this discussion oriented, please hop in with any thoughts or questions around some of the things that I'm kind of covering. But I'll give you to start it, kind of high level. Our focus is mostly on the technology side of things, and then a little bit on the branded consumer products. In terms of some of the trends today, that are shaping a very nascent industry coming of age in 2021, not 1921. The power of platforms in this space is beginning to really kind of come to the surface, not dissimilar to the way we've seen other platforms outside of cannabis come to the surface to kind of help facilitate a lot more than just one activity, within our life. As a result of that, there are a handful of platforms today, LeafLink being one of our portfolio companies, that deals on the B2B side of the supply chain. So, helping facilitate wholesale commerce. There are a number of consumer platforms that enable effectively, at a high level, greater customer access to this product via a number of different channels, which has implications in terms of new consumers entering this market in a new modern way that wasn't the case 10 or 15 years ago. A couple of those companies include Weedmaps, which was a company that came of age during California's path to becoming adult use legal. That market for a long period of time was very much a gray market, and Weedmaps was born out of the necessity of not being able to find a medical dispensary on Google because those platforms prevented a medical cannabis dispensary from advertising. So you can think of that as kind of a Yelp for cannabis. And that's, that company's been around for 10 plus years. That's kind of like, I'd say a 1.0 company that came of age kind of pre a lot of states legalization. On the online ordering side and delivery side, there are a few companies. One is a company called Dutchie, which Anand alluded to in his intro, but that company recently raised a substantial amount of money from a very blue chip investor, and as part of that transaction, acquired two other point of sale companies. So we see kind of this digital transition happening in the industry. And as part of that, we're starting to see some consolidation on the technology side, which is I think will continue to persist. If you look at kind of the physical markets, they're all very highly fragmented today, and so we've seen M&A activity across plant touching businesses before. Now we're starting to see more partnerships and consolidation across the technology side of the ecosystem, which will have a pretty substantial impact in terms of particularly on the B2B and B2C side, in terms of how brands and retailers interact with consumers, and how folks within the supply chain on the B2B side interact with different parts of the supply chain. So, and I think lastly, as one of the unique impacts of this kind of coming of age today, these platforms whereby online ordering, for example, as a result of COVID, these platforms got a big lift in terms of customer traction, where depending on the state, it's either between 20 or sometimes north of 50% of orders that might be fulfilled at a cannabis dispensary actually originate online on one of these companies like Dutchie or Jane. So as a result of this very accelerated digital transition, all of these platforms have a substantial amount of data exhaust that they monetize that data in some ways by selling it back to the market. But the result of that is we have a lot more information to understand how things are evolving in different markets, which for us we think is going to be a competitive advantage as we identify investment opportunities over the next 12 to 24 months, but well beyond. As we're still in the early innings, not the first inning, but certainly the earlier innings of this industry, that has a decade plus of runway to go. So I'll kind of pause there, Anand. I don't know if there's anything else you want me to touch on.
No, thank you. That's really helpful. And then in terms of, this was relevant for you, especially recently, given the kind of institutional landscape. Could you talk about institutional participation in the cannabis space as far as investment and some of the larger institutions that are actually participating?
Yeah, so those barriers in terms of real institutional participation are starting to melt a little bit. I think one of the and it's not a straight shot up and to the right, but you're starting to see institutions get more comfortable with engaging in this industry. I think it was within the last couple of months, you saw announcements from TIAA-CREF and Putnam. They disclosed that they're holders of a handful of publicly traded Canadian listed US MSOs. So that's a pretty big deal when you think about there is still regulatory ambiguity, given we don't have federal legalization. The US MSOs operate, across, many states, and are fully compliant in terms of state laws, but technically are still, somewhat in violation of federal law. And so to see institutions of that caliber begin to dip their toe in the water on the public side, I think foreshadows, what we'll see is greater institutional capital inflows. As Anand mentioned, there are some, pension fund and endowments that are starting to dip their toe in the water on the private fund side. which, I think as it relates to kind of capital flows, in the public markets are the easiest thing to look at because, there's data around that. But, these names are still very thinly traded. The positions that some of these pension funds have started to build, is just the tip of the iceberg. So, as the barriers continue to kind of wash away, I think we're going to see some structural changes with respect to a lot of capital wanting to get exposure into this space, which will have, substantial impact, I think, on prices. But, there is a little bit of a game to be played in terms of position yourself before what eventually will be substantial inflows as this industry becomes more legitimate and mainstream, following future regulatory kind of changes, which are percolating today, and will continue to.
Thanks, Maddox. And then I'll take. I know people are putting their questions in chat. Please keep doing that. I'm going to take the question from John in a second here, who's raised his hand, and then what I'll do is I'll just go through kind of the soft technology speakers. I call it soft technology, as in technologies related to platforms or e-commerce or brands that are utilizing e-commerce, and then kind of the hard technology, I call it, which is around more of the processing as well as waste kind of utilization that comes out of the cannabis industry. So, John, go ahead. What is the question you have?
My question, this seems like technology that will be adopted by not only the consumer packaged goods supply chain, but also the medical supply chain. And that seems to be not that that's the real opportunity, but you're basically reinventing the supply chain around delivery of services, goods and packaged goods. That seems to be like, that would be adopted across the industry because you're eliminating the efficiencies and using new tech versus the old tech that the major manufacturers and producers are straddled with. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I think if I understand kind of the commentary question correctly, the bifurcation or the difference between kind of the medical supply chain versus the recreational or adult use supply chain.
Yeah, it also, as it applies to the farmers, any farmer, any product.
Oh,
So you're basically reinventing, because you can't work with the existing technologies. You're reinventing in a better way to supply things to consumers directly.
yes, and I think in some ways, this is a big question we ask ourselves, when looking across the supply chain. But what does the vertical orientation do to benefit, the participants within the supply chain outside of a technology company that has a more horizontal approach that can serve multiple industries, whether it's, retail restaurants or, convenience stores. So, I think there are some components within the supply chain where the workflows and the processes and the participants are specific and nuanced enough to warrant, a high degree of value delivered through vertical orientation. I think there are other components of the supply chain. Payments is one that comes to mind, where it's a huge pain point today. In terms of, this industry is still largely cash driven. You can't legally accept credit cards, in any retailer. And there are a number of companies that have built kind of, what are effectively payment hacks in the interim before, this feels like going into a wine store, for example, where you can use your kind of, you can use your credit card. So, there's something to be said for, payments as a standalone product have what I consider to be like obsolescence risk. Once the consumer can use the payment forms that they're familiar with, they're going to gravitate towards that, not like another app that they download to use, in this particular situation. But like payments on platforms like large POS companies, like a cannabis, a toast of cannabis, or on LeafLink, where you're using payments as a monetization lever against an embedded, engaged audience, that's more interesting kind of to me. And then as it relates to, the supply chain between adult use in pharma, on the pharma side, it's in the medical side, it's still really, really early. You don't have any of those traditional, manufacturers outside of like GW Pharma and CBD really participating that much on the medical side of the supply chain, which, I think that's, we'll see substantial changes to that part of the equation, I think, further down the road. And some of that's going to be predicated upon, there's still been a lot of restriction on access that research institutions have to this product and these compounds to be able to, run studies. And so we're still really early there. That's why, the consumer market.
Oh, do we lose you, Maddox? I think your feed froze, Maddox.
Oops, sorry.
There we go. We're back.
Yeah, so I think we're seeing, the development of the recreational adult use market is a little bit more straightforward today. Like if you see in most states, once they introduce a adult use program, it has, somewhat of a negative effect on the medical program. But we haven't seen the medical programs look very much like the consumer programs today. We haven't even really seen it more as like a pharma program, which I think we will see as, some of these, pharma companies and research institutions get more access to be able to, actually run clinical studies on these compounds.
So let me, Lauren, I know you've got a question. If you don't mind just putting it in the chat for now, because I'd like to get a few more speakers to do their intros, and then we'll do kind of a chat on the kind of soft tech that I mentioned. But let me just queue up here, Jack. If you're, I think I saw you on there. I'm just going to queue up your spotlight video here and play it, and then you can go ahead and talk a little bit more detail. And then as I go through the kind of soft tech speakers, then at the end of that, I'll open it up again for questions. Give me 1 second here as I queue this up.
Hello, 361 firm members. Nice to meet you. My name is Jack Blazer. I'm founder and CEO of Mosaic. Mosaic is a new business bringing new technology to the exciting and explosive cannabis industry. Well, actually, probably not new technology, because similar technologies have been used in other industries to not only transform them, but to create icons of businesses. And isn't in technology like it there yet, so we can be the first. And we can also solve two of the biggest challenges the industry has in conversion and adoption. After all, it's a $344 billion industry if you include illicit use. And by bringing new users on board, we're able to help impact the lives of millions from a health perspective through medical use and infused beverages. If you'd like to learn more, please feel free to reach out. We'd love to have you join us. And thank you very much.
So Jack, could you talk a bit more about, you mentioned it's not kind of new technology, kind of what exactly you're focused on and how it's a, part of this theme of adaptation into the cannabis space?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And John and Maddox, thanks for that bit of intro, because you touched on some of those key points: reinventing technology from another industry, bringing it to cannabis, as well as the consolidation that Maddox talks about and the power of platforms. So I'm just going to touch on a few things, but what I want to do is kind of intrigue you, talk about maybe a use case in the future, how technology will change and how it will solve some of the biggest problems in the industry. So just if we look at the cannabis tech stack as it is today, you can see seed to sale, the new compliance and regulatory requirements that are unique to this industry, all the way through the marketing and the e-commerce. And today I would suggest it's fragmented. So here are some areas that will improve over time with technology and different platforms and the advancement. But because you have all these separate systems, so you talked about Dutchy, you talked about Weed Maps, the point of sale systems, they all kind of run independently and are somewhat integrated. What that means is the data analytics can't be fully leveraged. So some great companies like Headset are capturing data from point of sale system, but they're trying to pull it from different providers, and that gets difficult to really derive data-driven solutions personalized for that end user. And I've talked to big MSOs that has said, we'd love to have data in one spot. That's a real challenge. Operationally, cost efficiencies play into that as well. So just take a quick look at the industry here, and you can see that some of the big players, Ease, Weedmaps we talked about, have been already valued at over $1 billion. They're providing marketplaces today, as Maddox talked to us about. Marketplaces, areas you can go in to buy the product or look at it. You have other players like Springbig, different fragmented players providing loyalty rewards programs. You have others doing payments type solutions. So I'll throw out to the group, where are we going? What's next? What's going to be the big game changer from a technology perspective in cannabis? This is where we can tap into what John suggested. We already see it. Let's look at some mature markets out there. Restaurant industry is fairly mature, and we have very powerful e-commerce marketplace solutions called Amazon or Shopify for retail goods. But then the brands themselves have added what's a very powerful platform, and those are their own platform to basically build their brand, deliver a unique customer experience, capture their own data, be able to do analytics, and then drive personalized communications, everything you get from a Starbucks app or a Dunkin' Donuts app or a Domino's app. That's a different experience that they have proven through many case studies to drive engagement, larger order value, and help them build their brand to become iconic businesses. So why is that important? I'll quickly touch on this. This is what the analysts say, right? This is the projection of revenue by retail or the medical and the legal aspects. But also, I want to point out two things in this chart. Look at the red line. That's the illicit market. That stays fairly even. Why aren't we eating into more of that? Why aren't we projecting that more and more that's going to be moving to the legal market? And then second, some really nice growth here. It's a super high floor, super high. But with the advancement of new products in medical and infused beverages and edibles and CBD, that could be a lot faster, I would suggest. So let me tell you how I see this. And I'm putting this out there to be a little bit thought-provoking. But New Frontier says today, a couple years ago, it's a $344 billion market if you include illicit use globally. And that doesn't include the new users from medical, infused beverages, CBD. So what that tells me is that there's potential, won't be easy, but potential for this to be a 500 billion, 600 billion market fairly soon if we can tap into it. And the two big challenges are conversion and adoption. So again, Starbucks is an example. I mean, go back. Years ago, coffee was 25 cents, 50 cents, black coffee, put sugar in it, white, very simple. They got people to pay a lot more for a lot different types of brands to change the experience, to go into their stores, but digital played such a key role in that adoption. So I'll kind of conclude on this. What we're looking to do is bring that technology to the cannabis world. It's going to come. It will help the dispensaries and MSOs build their own brand. It will go in conjunction with the other marketplace providers, but it will be a very powerful tool. So how do we look to bring new technologies to help advance the industry? And that's what Make Mosaic and I'm looking to do. And by the way, I've got a strong team. Kevin Harrington, who you may know from the Shark Tank, is part of the team. Really deep technology expertise. And we're looking forward to changing the industry. So I hope that gives you just some insights, Anand. Thanks.
Thank you, Jack. Appreciate that. And Lauren, I know you've had your hand up, so I'll let you go with your question. And then I had a couple of follow-up items from some of the things Jack was mentioning. And you're on mute, Lauren.
I think we could do a whole nother session on what the barriers to, you could say, this difference between the illicit market and why that is so persistent. I don't even want to kind of go into it now, Jack, but I would really love to touch base with you on that. I can give you some insights on that. Matt, and I guess I'm on too. We talk about technology, the paraphernalia industry. all of the kind of stuff that the users will need in order to be able to consume cannabis. Is this something that people in the cannabis industry are thinking about? And if so, who are the players? Are they the same ones that are actually involved in cannabis? What's the size of that? And I would have to say, Anand, I'm fascinated by this idea of hands-on, plant, what you call plant touching, as opposed to the other ones. I think you could do a whole nother session just on that aspect. So yeah, what about the paraphernalia? And that's what I thought about it when you talked about hands-on or plant touching. What about the paraphernalia industry?
So I'll give a quick thought on that. And yeah, some of these threads in the cannabis space, I think I have to discuss this further with Mark, but we're probably going to do a quarterly series on it. And tech is one of those because you can go in so many directions and dive in deeper. Paraphernalia is an interesting one. If you look at the cannabis landscape and what's happening in California versus, in this area and kind of what the illicit market has focused on, the illicit market, the primary product is flower, right? They want to sell flower. It's cheap to produce, process, and get into their distribution network, which is one of the most efficient distribution networks in the world, in terms of getting things to people, home delivery, all of those things, almost as good in quality.
I'm loath to admit the insights that I can give to you.
Right,
on this.
right, exactly. So paraphernalia, is right now geared towards mostly flower or vaping. One thing that I'll kind of transition to, and I'd like to keep it kind of focused on these buckets for now, but I'll note that, Lauren, for future discussion. And one thing I want to note in what Jack was talking about is this could be for quoting his numbers, $500 to $600 billion industry, and I couldn't agree more. And I think the projections from many of the reputable kind of data providers of the cannabis space, they've had to be guarded because they don't want to have hypothetical numbers that have to do with full legalization at the federal level across states, et cetera, and include full projections for Europe, let's say, and other continents and other markets. But you can't really get good data on the illicit market, right? So it's tough to say. But new categories are being created. And new loyalty is being created by the brands. And so one of the key themes for, I think, the US in particular, as it looks at legalization is, and my, our point of view at Bar Capital is, legalization is going to happen. How it happens is a kind of risky procedure because politicians can trip up that process. But eventually it could happen. So our goal is not legalization. Our goal is to help empower brands in the US to dominate the globe, because that's what the US is good at. It's good at creating brands. Doesn't matter if it's, soft drinks or medical products or whatever it could be. If we empower our brands, they can, drive the next phase of growth. So just kind of tying it back, because Jack spoke last, Jack, you mentioned your focus kind of converting from the restaurant industry over to cannabis. What do you think, the cannabis users in terms of data are kind of showing, or what are the features that they're interested in, and how are the MSOs looking to capture, information and kind of build off of it?
Well, I've talked to many MSOs, and they're desperate to get real good data on their users from when they first, get interested and either jump onto an app, whether it's Dutchie or Jane Today, or go into a store and become part of the point of sale system. So they're having trouble consolidating the information and actually understanding their behaviors. And there's where, if you can have a consolidated app or a consolidated platform that lets you capture that data from end to end, the full life cycle, they say that'd be invaluable to what they're trying to do, because they need to understand what the barriers to entry are. And they're very complex, as I think Lauren is suggesting, that very complex. But to me, you've got the conversion of those users. So how do you make it easier for the illicit market to learn and want to buy a new product? Because out in the legalized market, we have so many different choices, right? You've got the edibles, all sorts of different choices to start to choose from in the future. But even more so, adoption. And I'll use myself as an example. I use a little bit, but I'm not a big user. In the past, I am fascinated by this industry, everything it offers to somebody like me to come in there new, start to have different choices of product that I can adopt, perhaps help with some medical conditions, but even kind of transform from using alcohol to using infused beverages. But I'll tell you, I don't understand it still. I'm learning, but myself and the millions of people out there, it's a little bit scary. So how do you pull them in? And technology can do that. Starbucks is a good example, but technology can do that. So how do you get people in there so they can learn at their own pace and dig into it and then be comfortable enough to make that order or even go into a retail shop?
Thank you for that. I do want to get through the speakers before we go too deep dive into the questions, so everybody has time to kind of spotlight what they're focused on, but that's a great transition. Jack just mentioned the beverage category. And then before that, in terms of where kind of Mosaic plays also, is the e-commerce side of things when it comes to cannabis. So I'd like to feature Rob Davis next from Alt to talk about, cutting edge stuff from California. So I'm going to play your video first, spotlight video first, Rob, that you've recorded in the past, and then we'll open up for you to give some background.
Hello, everyone. My name is Robert Davis. I am the CEO and co-founder of Alt, Advanced Liquid Technology. Alt is a premium liquid cannabis company with a mission to enhance human potential through our proprietary nanotechnology. Our revolutionary THC beverage enhancing products are currently available throughout California, offering a completely elevated and differentiated consumer experience. Our focus is really to empower consumers to create their own experience through precision dosing, an incredibly fast onset, a consistent offset, a completely unique euphoria, discretion, portability, versatility, and adaptability of our liquid into any beverage. In addition to our retail focus, our technology allows us to empower third-party beverage and edible products through our wholesale and white label business. For more information on Alt and the cannabis and lifestyle platform we're creating, please visit our website, altlife.com, or Instagram @altlife. My email address is robert@altlife.com. It's an honor to be a part of the 420 Cannabis Summit with all of you. A big thank you.
I'll stop there because that was from the 420 Summit, obviously, but I'll let Rob speak live now and kind of just give some more background on kind of what you're focused on, as well as some background on what's happening in terms of beverage category. And California is kind of leading that category. So please go ahead, Rob.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Great to be with you. I'm just going to share my screen. Everyone see that?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, so just take you through this real quick. Some of this will be repetitive to the video, but I want to make sure that all the details are loud and clear. Alt is a cannabis technology and lifestyle platform with a mission to enhance human potential. We certainly believe cannabis is a tool, and we've designed products to meet people in the moment to help them elevate, to enhance. As Anand mentioned, we are currently focused in the California market, the biggest market in the world, scaling quite quickly, but certainly looking to expand into multi-state international opportunities before the end of the year with both our brand and our technology. Quick snapshot of some of the product aesthetic. And then getting into the science. So we've been developing our nanotechnologies over the last several years with nanomaterial specialists, chemists, scientists, and we truly believe that we have the best of tech in the beverage space. We're one of the few beverage brands, beverage forward brands that owns their technology. And we felt it incredibly important to do so in order to be able to scale, to control quality, and to enter new markets. And so some of the aspects of our technology that really differentiate us from everything else in market are the clean label side of our products, 0 calorie, sugar-free, vegetarian, vegan, and paleo keto friendly, a clear liquid, quite rare in the nanotech space as it relates to cannabis. We felt it incredibly important to figure out how to clarify, given how we're showcasing our product in the clear glass vials. Sub 20 nanometer particle size. This is incredibly important because this is in direct correlation to the speed of onset, which with our product is 5 to 15 minutes. We believe one of, if not the fastest acting ingestible in market. What that also does is creates an incredibly unique experience from a euphoric standpoint. We've developed a formulation that gives a nice mild mind and body euphoria, and then a very consistent 2 to 3 hour offset. And what we felt was incredibly important in designing this product is to design something that kind of had a curve similar to alcohol, because we do look at this as an alcohol replacement. Fast onset, consistent offset. People want to know what they're getting on the front and the back end of the experience. The versatility of the technology is quite deep. With our tech, we're able to move into edible products. We're able to move into higher drug loads, work with rare cannabinoids like rosin, CBD. We'll certainly look to do effects-based lines, energy, immunity, sleep as an example, working with adaptogens, nootropics to further elevate those products and refine those products. And with our technology, we're able to help other brands enter the beverage and the edible space. And so we are active in the wholesale white label business and scaling that business this year. The products also lend a unique opportunity on the medical application side due to the precision dosing, being able to ensure the patient knows exactly how many milligrams they're getting and being able to titrate their dose, build the effects to satisfy the condition that they're working through. And then finally, kind of taking a step away from the tech and looking at beverage in general, we certainly believe that beverage is the future of cannabis. An incredibly approachable way to consume, one of the most familiar ways that we connect and socialize. And so you see some stats here on the left of anticipated category numbers this year. Quite impressive. The market in California is massively and rapidly growing on the beverage side. And so we feel like now the beverage is really kind of coming into its own, and from this point forward is going to really take off. And we have focused the products around, as I mentioned earlier, being an alternative to alcohol, being an alternative to smoking, a healthier way of consuming, and with the vial format, giving consumers really complete portability, versatility, being able to combine the liquid with any beverage that they choose. And in closing, that's our current SKU lineup, just to give you a feel of what we have in market now. And where we're going in the future is, again, as mentioned, rare cannabinoids, higher dose products, wholesale white label scale.
Thank you, Rob. And can you kind of talk about how your kind of distribution and marketing focus is structured? Are you doing mostly a focus on kind of e-commerce and through your website? Are you using kind of distribution through dispensaries?
So yeah, it's a multi-pronged approach. We have a couple of teams focus on what I like to call a dispensary battle, because that's certainly what it is. we're heavily focused online. We're partnered with Ease, the biggest online platform here in California, and really honored to be a part of that so early on in our journey. And certainly, from a core executive team, we're going to focus heavily on D2C. It's obvious that's where the market's going. And the beauty of D2C, in our opinion, is that you have your education right in front of you. So you don't have to rely on the buyer or the bud tender to be able to speak at a high level to this technology and what makes these products premium from a price standpoint. With the online platform, you have the technology right in front of you, you have the pretty pictures, and we're just finding a lot more success through those platforms at this time.
We have a question, and I know JD, you've had a few questions, so I'll highlight the latest one here. How is your IP defendable, and kind of how do you look at the IP side of your product?
IP is defendable. It's a trade secret. We haven't taken the patent path yet, simply because not federally legal. You're not going to secure a patent. We don't want to release our formulation to the public forum. So at this time, we've chosen keeping it a trade secret like Coca-Cola. We'll certainly look at the patent path in the future when we feel the time's more right and feel that we'll be able to secure a patent for the formulations.
Great, thank you, Rob. And I'm going to keep kind of going with the speakers because I'm mindful of the time. I want to make sure everybody gets to speak, and then we'll circle back for further questions and discussions. So on that e-commerce angle, I'll kind of wrap up the soft tech side of the panel with Mellow, which is based out of the UK and has a presence in Asia as well. And so James, I don't believe you had a spotlight video because you're kind of newer to the 361 platform, but if you could give your kind of background and talk a bit more about Mellow and your focus, that'd be great.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the introduction, and a pleasure to be here today. I think what was very interesting about the conversations to date, and this is the first time I've had the pleasure of joining this group, is how a lot of these conversations are slightly more US centric. When I genuinely believe it's a much more global play out there, and I guess I come from the UK, I need to look bigger than just our small market here. And I think for us US based, potentially that would be big enough for us. But what we've tried to do as a business and as a platform is look at how we can connect the CBD industry, retail, wholesale, and distribution from a global perspective. My background has been marketplaces. We've built, funded, and launched a marketplace here in the UK. We launched in June last year, which is a multi-brand. We have 96 brands on the marketplace and works very similarly to Amazon in terms of dropship model, integrated warehouse, payment solution built into the back end. And off the back of that and integrating a very robust KYC process for the marketplace, we understood actually there was a much stronger demand for non-UK brands looking to access the UK and European markets. So we built out, almost touched on some of the stuff you mentioned earlier, Jack, was how do we build out operations for brands looking to access the European market from a digital perspective, when the UK and European markets are very different to the US in terms of regulation around not only the selling of products, but also the payments, fundamentally the payments infrastructure over here. So we built out a business unit called Grow by Mellow, which helps these brands kind of incubate in the UK, build out their digital operations, and they go to market strategy, plus all the bells and whistles around customer acquisition, which we've tried and tested for Mellow as a marketplace. And we have a number of US clients over here as we speak. And then to finish the kind of patchwork global vision, we've just finalized a JV we've been working on for a number of months, based in Hong Kong and China. And that actually we built out a whole kind of cross-border China operations onto JD and Tmall Global with a kind of we have two angles into China. And again, this is kind of slightly caveated by Chinese regulation, which was slightly tweaked on Friday night. However, we have built out multi-brand stores on JD.com and Tmall Global, selling cross-border into China for global CBD brands. Plus, we have a number of flagship stores we're setting up for certain key brands entering the Chinese market. On top of that, we have a a bricks and mortar OTC infrastructure in Australia for a market we think is very interesting for global brands. More of the kind of first mover a market for a number, especially the beauty and the beauty segment, which they see the Australian market really as a test consumer. So we see the Australia as a key step, and Japan and South Korea as well. So we're trying to connect those dots from a global perspective. I mean, I know, and hearing about the US market, a lot of the and to your point, Anand, around having the US have incubate and grow these fantastic brands, these fantastic consumer brands. What we try to see from the US perspective is how do we harness the power of those brands and give the UK and European consumers the opportunity to see and interact with those brands and fundamentally kind of transact and what we're seeing, the UK market is a good number of years behind the US, a good 2 or 3 years behind the US in terms of brand offering. We have a very limited offering of quality, well-developed and well-thought-through brands over here. We look to the US, and a lot of our marketing agencies are based in California. We work with a lot of US brands because they really have the credibility and the background and the knowledge to be successful over here and into Asia as well. So we feel that, from a US perspective, looking out east towards Europe is a fantastic opportunity to develop into, as well as into Asia, and that it needs to be maybe a wider, slightly more ambition sometimes. I feel that again, maybe kind of speaking slightly from a mild lack of knowledge from a US perspective, that the US is clearly a competitive market, and there's a lot of market potential to gain, but it still remains very competitive. The UK and European markets are less competitive. The consumer is less savvy. However, the work we're doing as a platform around education and the kind of curated offering and driving trust and credibility to consumers is fundamental to the medium and longer term success, and the work we do in the kind of CSR space and ESG space around trying to transform what fundamentally has been an industry which is kind of relatively full of cowboys. One way to look at it, and still remains fairly Wild West in certain aspects, is how do we tidy the industry up as a whole and drive more credibility for the consumers and for the ecosystem at large, to ensure that actually we're not cannibalizing our potential consumers by letting uncredible players come into that space. So from a business standpoint, we're looking to really connect those dots globally and really understand the value that can be harnessed from bringing kind of global players into European market and a European market into Asia. And we see our development Asia and potentially LATAM at some point in the near future, Mexico and Latin America, South Africa, and even the Middle East at some point in the near future. It's just become legal a few days ago. So again, that opens up kind of uncharted waters and huge opportunities, especially for US brands who are looking to maybe find a slightly kind of greener grass to play in. So I'd say that the world's your oyster. So look outside the US shores.
Thank you, James. And that is a great point. We try to make it a point to reach out to speakers from Europe and Asia, and now we're seeing more from South America. But given the number of CBD and now also THC brands that are out there, I think curated platforms and consumer consumer focused solutions are going to gain more and more traction. And so there's a question in the chat: what is the regulatory landscape like in the UK, EU/Europe? So if you have any comments on kind of where things stand, and people might not be aware, the London Stock Exchange also now allows for cannabis companies to list, which has happened in the last four months or so in particular. If you give some background on that, James, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean, it's slightly kind of complex and kind of quilted kind of legislation landscape. I mean, you look at the UK with novel foods. As it stands, they having to put in a novel food license or application before the end of Q1 was mandatory. There are a very large number of manufacturers who have put in that application, and today it really hasn't affected the landscape in any way, shape, or form. Some people felt that it might destroy the market, but actually not a single, for example, not a single brand on Mellow, the marketplace, has dropped off because of novel foods. Europe holds is slightly more challenging and frustrating. France still is a non-transactional market for CBD, unless it, I think it's wrong, unless it's a synthetic CBD is the only what they allowed in the French market. Germany is huge, and again, adheres to the same kind of European novel foods application. But fundamentally, what we're trying to do is look at it as a market by market. So we are present in Spain, Italy, Germany, and Scandinavia, plus the UK. We'd love to see France go in the very near future. So we're very poised, kind of on the cusp. We've built out Mellow in France, but it's non-transactional. So we're ready to kind of flick the switch as and when legislation lets us flick the switch. But we often hear that as a bit of a pushback from US brands around kind of lack of clarity in the kind of regulatory landscape. But fundamentally, it's relatively clear. And again, I'm more than happy to deeper dive into that for anyone who wants to kind of talk through it. It's a passionate subject of mine. But yeah, again, I wouldn't use that as a barrier to entry and or a hurdle that can't be overcome, with the right knowledge and strategic approach.
Thank you. So I'd like to talk about the last couple of panelists and kind of go over the hard tech side, and then we'll open it up for panel discussion. And if it goes over one, I think we're still good as long as people want to keep participating with the panelists. So next up, we have Jennifer Diane Thomas, who's CEO of Province Brands. Jennifer, I apologize. I think you did upload a spotlight video, but I didn't have it queued up. And if you could just give a quick intro here instead, that would be great. And then talk a bit more about what you're focused on.
Sure. Hi, Jennifer Thomas, and I am the CEO of Province Brands of Canada. And at Province Brands, we are an IP technology company based in the food and beverage space. And what we've been doing for the last few years is creating a portfolio of intellectual property that's focused on sustainability. And we have been proving the concept on our intellectual property, mostly in the cannabis and hemp industry. So our big tagline right now is waste stream to revenue stream. And that's mostly because when we started out as a company, wanting to take leftover cannabis plant material, mostly because most of you know that in the cannabis space, for every 1 ton of cannabis that consumers see and that hits the cannabis shelves as an end product, there are about 4 to 8 tons of that leftover plant material that's, destroyed, burned, not ever reused, and just fills our landfill. We all know that waste is a growing problem in our industry. And, honestly, it's a significant problem in a lot of manufacturing and agricultural spaces. And so we set out to solve this problem. And we started off with the idea of let's take leftover cannabis plant material and let's make a beer out of it. Let's turn that waste material into a beverage or something that has a really high value and something that consumers are very familiar with. And so we set down the path of making a gluten-free, because, cannabis doesn't have gluten, so just like wheat and barley that you're familiar with making beer out of, it does have gluten. So we started off making a gluten-free beer from leftover cannabis and hemp plant material. And on that journey, we have pulled together not only a really amazing tasting beer that we can make, but we've also wrapped in other amazing technology that we can, we can use to transform leftover cannabis and hemp plant material into many other end products for consumers. And so we are now, we now have technology where we can use leftover plant material to make ready to drink beverages. We can make fermented beverages of just about any kind. That's kombucha, that is beer, that's cider. And one of the flagships in our IP portfolio, especially right now, is that we can actually take the leftover hemp and or cannabis plant material and we can make a sugar syrup. And it's a syrup and a sweetener, and we call it a alternative or a plant-based sweetener. It's a gluten-free sweetener. It is vegan. It's organic. We believe that it will be organic certified. And in addition to that, one of the most amazing parts of this is that this is a sweetener that will retain many of the benefits that you get from the cannabis or hemp plant. So that starter plant material will guide these end products. So for example, our sugar syrup has fiber in it. It still has terpenes. It has prebiotics. So it has all of these benefits that you can get from the starter plant, the hemp and the cannabis plant, and it's transitioned and transformed into a sweetener that is unlike any other. Because if you turn around if you've got a bottle of honey right now in your pantry, you turn it around, you're gonna see, 0,0,0,0,0 basically down the label. And most other sweeteners are not that far from that. But imagine, the way that our paradigm can change when we say not only are we making a sweetener from leftover plant material, so things that won't pull from other food sources, things that aren't harmful to the environment, so there's a sustainability focus, but we also are making a sugar or a sweetener that has health benefits. And in some ways, things like that are just unheard of. And so at the heart, our company is really focused on how we can make products that are, good for the environment, but also good for you as an end consumer from a wellness perspective. And we think that this is a space that's a bit uncharted. Not that many people are reaching into the space, and we think that we're solving a problem before it becomes, a terrifying problem that we all, our whole industry will have to reckon with later down the road, which is that problem of what are we going to do with all this leftover plant material? Because, when you trim off the buds of the cannabis plant, there's still a ton of, leaves, stems, stalks, roots, and we can use all of that material within our product lines. And the most interesting thing that we think that our company brings to the table is this intellectual property that we're proving in the hemp and cannabis industry, but also the ability for industries like ours, like the hemp and cannabis industry, to lead the way and build technology that has applications outside of our own industries. Because while we're proving the model here in hemp and cannabis, the technology does not end here. We can license this technology to Starbucks, and all the leftover coffee beans that they have and that they throw into the landfill, those could be somehow transformed into beverages. They could be sweeteners. Imagine being able to sweeten your coffee with a sugar syrup that started off as coffee beans. And we see that application in a lot of the food and beverage manufacturing processes. If you are a company that makes cold pressed juices, you've got a lot of pulp left over. You can take all of that pulp with our technology and you can make a sweetener, a sugar syrup that started off as your pulp, your waste stream. And so imagine the possibilities of companies in our own industry being able to take all of the things that they used to have to consider just part of the leftover and have another product line or another revenue stream that can come of it. And so we're pretty excited about the possibilities of the technology. While we have focused namely in the food and beverage space, we focused on making a beer, which we have succeeded at doing. We focused on making ready to drink beverages, and we focus on making sugar syrups. We see this really as the starting place for where the technology will go. And that is, kind of the story that we like to bring to the table as a company. And, we also want to point out, I also like to point out all the time that, for a long time, a lot of things that we have been doing when it comes to making sugar syrups and when it comes to making beer and industries like this have just been the same for centuries. And we've just expected the same thing. And it is really important that as we, grow as an industry in the cannabis space, that the technology that we make, has an impact on all of these other sectors. And I think, personally, I think that's a start to making sure that, at least in the States and other places, that federal legalization broadens, because the technology that we're creating isn't somehow just about, our industry. It has a really broad application in other places. And so, again, at Province Brands, we really are an ESG company. We are an IP portfolio company, but more than that, we're taking, things that are left over and making them into valuable streams. Right now, we're pre-revenue. We are hoping to go into market with our first products this year. We're focused on a B2B marketplace. I know our previous speaker just mentioned that there is a lot of really good, value in the B2B space, because then, we all can lift each other when it comes to educating on the products. And so we are, as an ingredients company, we know we have a lot to offer other cannabis companies that are making beverages, that are making edibles, because instead of sweetening your cannabis edibles with high fructose corn syrup, you could actually be sweetening them or with a cannabis derived or a cannabis plant-based syrup that has health benefits. And most of our end consumers are looking at consumption of cannabis and hemp, CBD, cannabis, THC, with an eye towards, wellness and a healthy, impact on your body. And so often when we're venturing out in their new cannabis 2.0 spaces outside of just rolled, outside of cannabis flower consumption, and we're talking about cannabis edibles and beverages, we still have a lot of way to go in the industry to say, okay, well, how are we going to continue? You're getting all the health benefits of the cannabis, but often you're mixing that with all these other unhealthy or ingredients that do not have real genuine benefit to the consumer. So imagine, downing, 4 or 5 servings of sugar because you're trying to mask the flavor of the cannabis in order to have a great tasting beverage. And we hope to solve those kind of problems, but not just solve them in a way that just adds another ingredient to the list. We're solving them in a way that adds another ingredient, but also has, some sustainability messaging that our, eventual B2B partners will be able to message to their consumers that everything that they're putting in their ingredients, not only is it healthier and, a better alternative to sweetener, but it also is a better for our environment. And so one of the things that I do like to mention is that, we are also working on our carryover technology. We make our sugar syrups and we make our beverages right now with very little carryover of the THC. That's because, when you're in the manufacturing process, if you're taking leftover plant material, you need it to have a uniform effect. All of the plant material may have different levels of THC, may have different levels of CBD. And so right now that carryover is something that we are, we have actually planned to remove. But down the line, we also are focusing on, really bespoke versions of these products where, manufacturers might say, hey, we want just this plant material that is from this plant and from this batch to go in to create some end product. And, and we want to, we will have that as a focus. So, hopefully
yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
That was a great background. And so I'll ask JD's question from earlier also is, how defensible is your IP, and are there competitors in that space, or are you kind of seeing that there's so much opportunity here that there's a lot of market to capture?
Yeah, there's a lot of market share here. We actually think that competitors in the space don't do anything but prove the concept that, that this is something that's necessary and viable and is important to our industry. And when it comes to the defensibility of the IP, we take the approach that, we go through and we patent our technology, and we do that in a way that we think still allows us to hold back some parts of the process, to have some trade secrets on the line. And we call that a bit of a hybrid approach to IP protection. So what we do is we patent our process up to a point that we think, you definitely can have some repeatable results. But in order to have the efficiencies of process, to have the know-how to really fine tune it and have the repeatable results that we think are the most optimal, we hold some of that back as trade secret. And we have found that approach to be, pretty, a pretty viable way to put a nice fence around what could be, intellectual property that we don't want copied. So, and one thing we continue to do is just continue to innovate. In my opinion, continued innovation is another way to make sure that your IP is always defensible. Every time someone thinks that they've got a good handle on what we've put together, we're always optimizing and always updating, and and we continue to optimize the process. And we think of that in the same way that you've got Tylenol, then you've got time release Tylenol, and then you've got gel caps, and then you've got all these other things. And so as that medical tech, that medicine technology or that pharma technology has its base, you always see the adaptations and the growth and the innovation. And by continuing to innovate, we always find that we're just ahead of the market, and it just makes it that much more difficult. So
thank you. That's very helpful. And I know you're getting some questions coming through, but we'll circle back shortly. And I'm going to go ahead and play the spotlight video for our last panelist who's available today. And then I will circle back and start opening it up to general questions as well. And we'll go back in the chat and address some of the earlier questions.
My name is Dr. Ian Atkinson, and I am the co-founder and chief scientific officer of Grow Group PLC. I have a PhD in plant molecular biology and biochemistry, and have 25 years of experience in the life science and medical device industries across a range of applications. Grow Group is a leading European medical cannabis company based in the UK with a strong focus on scientific rigor and innovation to improve the quality of life for patients. There's little doubt that the expanding European cannabis market make it an attractive investment opportunity. I fundamentally believe that to significantly increase the market size for cannabis-based medicinal products, innovation is absolutely key to improving efficiency as cannabinoids commoditize. To bring down the cost of goods while maintaining margins, all the while keeping high quality standards in manufacturing, will require new tools in the toolbox. We are working to do just that, which we will discuss in this upcoming panel discussion. Thank you, Mark and Anand, for the opportunity to share our vision, and I'm looking forward to a great dialogue with your panel on Tuesday.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anand.
Ian. If you want to cover, I know Grow is focused on medical distribution in the UK and Ireland and expanding in other geographies in Europe, but your focus as co-founder, could you cover more about kind of some of the technologies you're working on and what the need is in the marketplace?
So to your point, we have three arms. We have a Grow Pharma arm, which is the market access and the commercialization agent for licensed producers with EU GMP products. We have Grow Trading, which is the network for global distribution and novel trading strategies. And then this piece, which is Grow Biotech, which is our R&D arm. And that's the goal of which is to produce products that actually provide significantly lower capital expense and likewise lower operating costs versus conventional tools. So just new tools in the toolbox. So the technology that I'll be talking about today is the Cortana technology. It's meant to complement or even replace traditional distillation, which relies on heat and vapor pressure via vacuum to separate compounds of interest based on a difference in boiling point. Our Cortana technology employs a rapid capture and recovery of oily compounds, primarily associated with a sugar polymer. So if you have an extract that you add water to, the cannabinoid compounds being oily don't want to be in the water. They want to hide. So they want to hide on the walls of the vessel. They want to hide on the skim on the top of the surface of the vessel. So what you get is you get no place for the oily compounds like the terpenophenolics, which include terpenes and cannabinoids, to go, except they want to scoot away and be out of the water. What we've given them is a place to go. We've given them a sugar polymer, which has an oily center, and then we can drive the material into that. Have you got the first slide?
Yeah, hold on one second. I'm not sure if Inessa, Mark, you've got it up.
I'll just keep talking while you're driving that.
Okay.
But we're creating molecular encapsulation, which is basically we're providing a location for those hydrophobic compounds to hide. And in doing so, it drives into the center of our polymer, which is kind of like a salt shape. So salt grains in a tea bag get dipped into the extract. We add water. And what we're doing is we're driving the capture process in a very simple and very automatable way. So the first step is to capture. We basically have this novel sponge that we're adding, which captures these oily plant products. We wash away the water-soluble material, and we keep the hydrophobic material, the oil-soluble material, and that gets hidden in the polymer. Then we just use a tea bag approach because the polymer, if it's in a tea bag, we just lift the string and you pull it right out. So separation is based around, you take the material out with the string, you put it into a wash solution, lift it out with the string, and let it drip dry. It's that simple. Now you can store and dry this material. So in step 3, what we're doing is we're taking that polymer, which is now complex with the cannabinoids and the terpenes, and we just freeze dry it. And now you've got a dry powder, which can be stored for long periods of time. We estimate it'll last about 2 to 2.5 years with very little degradation, because on the polymer, it's quite stable. It can also be shipped as a dry powder. So you could dry ship hundreds of kilograms, if not tons of material in dry bulk bags as this polymer, stable polymer, and then it can be used at the end point for a consumer packaged good. Recovery is actually very simple. You literally take the dry powder, put it back into a tea bag, immerse it into an extraction solvent like ethanol at low volume, and what you have is now material that's ready to be used at the consumer site. Similarly, in a different direction, we can take this material, which is dry powdered complex, and we can release it via heat, which means that we can actually create a whole new vaping product. We can do dry vaporization on a vape pen by just taking our polymer, which is complex with the cannabinoids and the terpenes, put it into a sachet, put the sachet into a dry herbal vaporizer, and then vaporize it directly. So now we've actually got 2 different routes where we can actually have either products that come out into solution or products that come out via heat and can be inhaled. So it eliminates a lot of the challenges associated with e-juice and some of the carrier fluids and some of the risks that are associated with lipoid lung that come about from some of these carrier fluids. We can go straight into step 6, which is formulation from this point. And going back to step 5, this polymer can be reused multiple times. We've actually reused it over 10 times with no decay of capture efficiency. So the fact is, it's very simple, it's very cost effective, it's very easy to use without a lot of skill and expertise required. Next slide, please, Anand. So the problems that are solved here are actually quite straightforward. One, with fewer steps, there's less loss, and therefore it increases the yield of the material. The process does not require highly skilled labor, so it can actually reduce the costs associated with your hiring. There's an extremely high tolerance for wet and water in the extract. So therefore, if using product that has 15–20% relative humidity, it's still not going to inhibit the distillation process because it actually uses water to help to capture the material. It's a cleaner process because it gets rid of all of that water-soluble contaminant, and therefore there's very little carryover of those contaminants. It's flexible input options, so you can use ethanol, you can use supercritical CO2, you can use alkanes, and you can use other new sort of future cannabis extracts as well, which might include pressurized hot water extraction, rosin, and the like. So it's very flexible in terms of what goes into the system. It maintains the decarboxylated forms of the cannabinoids if that's desirable. So it doesn't automatically mandatorily require that everything has to be decarbed going out to the next step. As I said, it's easily automatable, which increases the throughput during high volume times, such as during an outdoor harvest. And it's performed with a single pass, which increases that throughput significantly. And because the polymer can be used multiple times, this reduces the reagent cost pretty dramatically. So we believe that the dry polymer complex can also be used as a safer dry version of the vape pen. And it also allows that powdered complex, because it's generally regarded as safe, to ultimately lead to the possibility of being eaten. So it could be included in edibles, or it could be included in capsules and tablets. Questions, concerns?
Thank you, Ian. Appreciate that walkthrough in layman terms for at least for me and anybody else who's not a scientist on the call. Could you talk about some of the challenges that exist today in CBD processing, for example, and any inefficiencies that what you just talked about would solve?
Okay. Well, problem number 1 is volume. when dealing with broadacre CBD manufacture in the US and Canada, one of the big challenges is trying to harvest all of that wet material in a very short period of time. So you have, when you're harvesting the flower for CBD, you're doing so at a relative humidity of about 70 to 80%. You're trying to bring it down to about 5 to 10% if you're going to be going into these extract solvents. The problem being that in that short period of time, if you don't manage it quickly, you have a real problem associated with loss, because you're going to have the risk of it catching fire, like a mulch fire. You have the risks of the material developing pathogens. So you can get fungus, you can get bacteria all over this. It's been grown outside, so it's got bird poop all over it. So there's a significant risk of pathogen infestation. And so you want to be processing this quickly. And you have a large volume if you're doing anything more than 20 acres. So you have to have a high tolerance for water to manage if you're going to be trying to process this very, very quickly. Yet if you try to use if you try to dry the material using a lot of heat, it's very expensive in terms of the cost. And it's also going to be burning off a lot of the significant cannabinoids, because you're going to be heating it too much if you're trying to get it dry too fast. So that's one of the big challenges that I see, is trying to reduce not only the water content, but also the volume, because you're going to have to store it someplace. If you've got 500,000 kilograms worth of CBD-rich flower mass ready to use, where do you put it? Most people don't have adequate storage that doesn't cause the material to break down, either with light, oxygen, basically creating CBND from CBD, for example, and oxidizing the active ingredient you're looking for.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that, Ian. And so now I think, Mark, you had a question or comment, and then after that, my role is kind of done, other than I'll summarize at the end, but feel free to jump in with questions from the audience level. And I just wanted to note, Eddie Vanderpart also has joined. So after you're done, Mark, I wanted to just spotlight Eddie as well.
We need to give Eddie some lighting as we spotlight him.
There we go. It's starting to get
out of the shadows. So I'm just curious if the panel or anybody here has been focused on synthetic biology, because we have one of our babies that's grown up is active in there, and I keep hearing about yeast, and then they have bacteria, and for the production of cannabis or CBD, that they could be an interesting disruptor over time. Anybody seeing developments in this area?
Hey, Mark.
Judy? Yep. Hey, Judy.
Octarine Bio. Take a look at this. It's a company out of Denmark. It's the first portfolio company from Oscar Capital. They're using synthetic bio there, building out psilocybin, using yeast, also THC, different strains, adding strains of sugar to them so that they could get novel cannabinoids built. The beauty of this also is that they're working alongside the University of Denmark there. They're also working with the Sovereign Wealth Fund, who invested alongside us. And ultimately, they're building out a whole platform of synthetic bio.
Great. And I know we're talking soon as well, JD. Anyone else?
Hi, this is Jay. There's sorry, my camera's off right now, but yeah, there's quite a few interesting companies and works at play right now that are one, either doing entirely synthetic production of or trying to optimize the process of synthetic production of the already existing cannabinoids. Second is, doing the hybrid approach, which is taking some precursors from the plant and then using yeast to execute on these cannabinoids. And then the third one is obviously some people, including myself, like very highly interested in studying all the different analogs of it. And I guess this is very futuristic. Why not be informed? So great question. Bay Medica, I would say, is a company. He's a close friend of mine as well, actually. He's doing CBC synthesis, hybrid synthesis via yeast.
Great. Ian, did you have another comment?
I did. I think one of the challenges is not going to be, can you make material synthetically? It's, can you make material cost effectively? So for example, if you're going to be starting with expensive precursors to get you there using biosynthesis, or if you're using expensive catalysts, if you're doing this chemically, how can you keep this from becoming a $1,000 sample? And I think the companies that are going to be the most successful are going to be the ones that can get those rarer cannabinoids cost effectively. So I think there's a real good chance for us to see some incredible developments on the innovation side. But I hope that they don't try to push the expensive premise and try to keep the prices reasonable so that the cost of these products are appropriate for the patient.
I agree with you, Ian. This is Jay again. That is exactly what I'm noticing as well. Is it's kind of almost like a trend and a competition in how you can produce this in the most efficient and a cost-effective manner. Because you and I both know we can do this actually quite simply and easily with some effort. Produce any chemical we want synthetically. It does ultimately come down to the efficiency and the cost.
Well, I welcome that challenge, and I also welcome you should know yeast versus bacteria. Also, it's a question of how quickly you can cycle it. But I'll pause on that. That's a different event. Anand, carry on.
Yeah, a lot of these topics could be their own event, and as you can see, we try to fit in quite a few really great panelists, and then it always runs over. So. Now's the time if you have questions. I apologize if I didn't address your question from the chat, but now's the time to kind of open up the discussion, panelists included. So if anybody has any items to cover, feel free. Otherwise, I can keep going with my my questions. And then when it's Q&A time, everybody's quiet.
Question for Robert. Associated with brand sort of fit to purpose beverages versus a beverage that actually sits aside. Strengths and weaknesses, do you think, that are associated with making your product as a standalone liquid versus branding it as a beverage in and of itself? Is it flexibility? Is it means of stability? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I appreciate it. So why did we position as a enhancer versus a beverage? You nailed it. Really, versatility, empowering the consumer to create their own experience. In doing so through the dosaging marks on the side of each vial, which allow them to manage their dose, allow them to pour it into any beverage. We've designed the flavor profile as neutral as possible so that it can really adapt to any beverage. The other side of that is discretion and portability. With these vials, you can really take them anywhere. You can take them to an event, you can take them into a bar. You're going to have a hard time bringing a full beverage into those locations. And so the portability side, and with that, the discretionary side, you're having a tea at lunch and you pop the tea. That's pretty easy to do discreetly. Bringing a whole beverage to the table would be much more challenging unless that was allowed. And so we felt it important to use this as kind of the base product for all those reasons, and then build a consumer base and then move into, if it makes sense for us, ready drink beverages, or if it doesn't make sense for us, do that for other groups that want to be in the beverage game with our technology. Thanks, Ian.
Any other questions from the audience, or should I keep going? Oh, Ian looks like he's got another one. Go ahead, Ian.
Jennifer, context of some of the inconsistency of output from the exhausted biomass. You get some groups that are using organic, some groups that are not. Some groups that are actually doing a particular process, some groups that are not. How do you actually choose your suppliers?
Yeah, I mean, we do try to take in as much supply as possible, right? Because the idea is that, the pickier we get, the further away we get from the mission of actually doing that good service of recycling and reusing and repurposing the material. So we characterize all of the input material and we try to group, like similarly situated material with each other. You know, in an ideal world, most of the cannabis input material we get should and would be organic. Most regulatory frameworks require very little, you know, require growers to use, you know, kind of very little additives and things like that when they're growing it. But when we start broadening that to hemp and other plant materials, it will mean that we'll have to do a lot more to characterize the material. One thing that we do is that, you know, we have had our focus and our start as a company in the beverage space and in the alcohol beverage space. And one thing that alcohol beverage producers do is that there's always a constant blending of, you know, the extract or the final product of, you know, the beer or the spirit or whatever it is. And part of that blending is for exactly what you're saying, to account for, you know, consumer palate changes. You want to make sure you can have the same consistency, that consumers don't taste any difference, you know, from batch to batch. And one of the ways to do that is to continuously blend, so that each batch in some ways still has a good percentage of the last batch. And there's always this consistency and continuity that you get in the manufacturing process. As much as we would like to, we won't be able to use every piece of raw material that we get in. Every plant biomass won't be able to be used. If we find that, you know, there are chemicals in it that just won't be consistent with their process, you know, then we may have to discard it. But what we're doing, a few things. One, we're trying to characterize material very well so that we can, you know, get in as much material that's similarly situated as possible. And we, once we make that evaluation, we have part of the proprietary process that we do is this cleaning, this, you know, treating and pre-treating and continue treating before we start the process of folding it into the ordinary manufacturing steps that we have. And so all of that pre-treatment will also help us be able to use more material than we would have previously if we, you know, if we were saying, oh, we only can take a limited, you know, a spec sheet of, if we can only take your waste material if you do these things. We also are trying to work actively with the people that we're sourcing the material from, because then we can start the process of saying, okay, if you change these steps in your cultivation process, if you change these steps in your manufacturing process, even hopefully small steps, that will give us more opportunity to use your waste material, and also will make your waste material a little bit more efficient when it comes to producing the sugars and producing the extract that we're trying to produce. So that's one way that we do that. And additionally, we're working with other partners such that if we get material that we aren't able to use, one of our joint venture partners actually takes the material and makes biodegradable plastics. We'll send any material that we can't use their way. So we really are trying to create a multi-product manufacturing facility that will allow us to take the premium plant material that we get in, use it for the purposes of food grade products, and for the less than premium materials, we can send it to another revenue stream right down in our facility that could be used for making, you know, biodegradable plastics. And a lot of the technology is very similar in those two streams.
Mm-hmm. Follow on then would be, how would you actually keep, obviously the waste streams right now are not particularly costly, but there is a risk associated with demand for waste, as other groups, the fiber people, the people who might be your primary competitors, start to get online and start to actually boost that price. How do you tolerate the price differential?
Well, right now, it's built into our process that when we work with cannabis companies, there's a lot of regulatory framework that doesn't really allow for companies that are cultivating to just, you know, throw away their material. So there's also a very, you know, there's a process that has to happen from just the government's perspective on how that organic material can be discarded. And so, you know, there's also for some companies a cost center there. You know, here in Canada, we have found that some people are actually paying companies to take this away. So we're hoping to work synergistically with these companies so that, you know, hey, we can take this this line from your revenue stream, because you'll no longer have to pay to discard it, and we'll take that, and then you no longer have this cost center basis for actually destruction of that plant material. When it comes to hemp, and as we broaden out to other spaces, there's a lot still that our process is able to use that a lot of other recycling processes aren't able to use. We can use roots, we can use stems, we can use a lot of parts of the plant that just right now no one is reusing. So over time, we'll have to focus on that competitive advantage. But we think right now we're so far ahead of the game that we've got the opportunity to build those relationships and really put in place the legwork needed to make sure that we don't have that competition. Now, honestly, further down the road, it would be to our advantage and probably our competitors' advantage to probably coalesce in this area. Instead of competing with each other, let's work together collaboratively, and let's work with everyone who has all these waste streams that we're using at the same rate, and then let's instead of cannibalizing the market, let's work together. Let's get the waste stream, and then we can characterize it and send it out, and and buy it from that center. And we've seen a lot of other more robust industries do that. If there's a competitive space, instead of driving the price up, let's work together. Let's get it the price in a comfortable place, and then let's compete on the other side with the end products that we produce, and not with the input material.
Brilliant.
I have one question for Ian. By the way, very, very good presentation and very interested and lots of questions. I'll ask one in regards to so is it a plant-driven compound that behaves like a polymer, or is it a polymer that is like a?
It's beta-cyclodextrin, which is derived from starch. Gotcha. And so we know that beta-cyclodextrin is generally regarded as safe. What we've done is we've created a linkage to it to make it into an insoluble polymer. So part of this is assuming that the linkage doesn't cause any toxicity. It could easily be used for a number of different uses. It could be used for the vape. It could be used for edibles. It could be used just as a primary mechanism to capture the hydrophobic compounds and then to release them using solvents. So it gives us some flexibility in that regard, and it doesn't limit it to cannabis. It was designed for cannabis, but it wasn't actually a cannabis product specifically, in that it could be used for other hydrophobic plant capture. So other plant extracts could be used to capture their hydrophobic compounds as well. So this is a little bit backwards, because most of the tech is going from repurposing from existing other technologies and other industries and bringing it to cannabis. This is starting at cannabis and working towards the pharmaceutical industry or to big tobacco.
No, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. I like that. Thank you.
Thanks. Good question.
Any other questions? Cedric, you got a question?
Yeah, maybe. Ian, again, very, very informative. We've been pretty familiar with that space for a while, but I still learned a lot. So Mark had mentioned biosynthetics, and we were talking about that. If someone were to ask, a comparison, you'd already commented, of course, on cost of production, but putting that aside for a moment, is there, maybe the question first, is there, and then if there is, what would be, but would there be a difference in either efficacy in the production of CPG products, using the cannabinoids that you're able to extract and separate compared to a biosynthetic? And then is there a difference in bioavailability in the body? Like, are there differences in kind of utility and consumer experience compared to cost using the cannabinoids you're able to extract with your process compared to maybe some biosynthetics?
Okay, so quick clarity in that what we're trying to produce is a full spectrum extract. We're not actually going for individual compounds at this point. Generation 2 will actually go for using a tea bag that can capture an individual cannabinoid. Now, in terms of the biosynthetics, they make one cannabinoid, maybe two at max, but they're making a singular cannabinoid, no terpenes, no entourage effect expectation. That said, it's clean. It's likely that you're making CBC or you're making CBL, nothing else, because the mechanism is controlled by the machinery that you put into the yeast or the algae. So it's going to be a clean isolate in terms of what you can capture from that algae. It means that if you're going to be looking for the breadth of experiences you would have in a cannabinoid mixture with terpenes from the flower, not going to get it. If you're looking for CPG products which have one compound, one ingredient, and you can control that ingredient very tightly, absolutely. Is it any different from an isolate, a crystal isolate that you can get from purification using some sort of capture from an extract from the plant? If it's the purity is the purity and the compound is identical. Now, if you're going to be using quinones or any of these analogs, you're making different products either from like in either direction. So you can make THC from CBD from the plant. That THC is still THC. If you're going to be doing a biosynthetic to make THC, it's going to be THC. It's going to be the same chemistry. It's just for consumer packaged goods, you're going to have one compound. It's going to be an ingredient that you can control very tightly.
Are they beginning to combine those individual ingredients?
Yep. That's the magic of reconstitution. Yeah. I like to think of it kind of like a paint can, in that if you have a base coat where you have a particular set of terpenes that you want in your mixture, if you have a particular set of cannabinoids, you can kind of put in some base amounts of certain compounds. And then you can top it up by adding a little bit of pigment, from the paint can analogy, a little bit of blue, a little bit of green, a little bit of orange, shake it together, and you can get the exact constituents you're looking for in your mixture.
If we were going to segment, pharma and consumer products, where are you closer to one side or the other? Or in your target, or where you see?
Actually, that's a great question, because I don't differentiate them at all when it comes to ingredient quality. If you're looking for a scientifically rigorous compound, either as an ingredient for a pharmaceutical product, an ingredient for, the analogy I use is the vitamin industry. Would you buy a product in vitamins that had a little bit of vitamin C, a little bit of vitamin D, unknown in terms of the rest of the vitamins? Maybe there's a little bit of vitamin Q, maybe there's a little bit of biotin, but you really don't know, and every particular batch is going to be a little bit different. Nobody would buy a vitamin like that. If you can actually control that process very tightly to make an ingredient that would go into a Coca-Cola product, you would actually need to have 99.2 or greater % purity on that product if it's an isolate. If you're going 99.2% purity for an ingredient going into a pharmaceutical product, same sort of thing. Quality is key. And good manufacturing process is going to be making products with really good quality. And then you can add them back together if you can add 2 or 3 compounds, if that makes sense for not only for the medical cannabis side, but also for the adult use side. You want really good control if you want to control your experiential, as Robert has shown.
How do you look at this from an ESG perspective? Assuming you can figure out the economics, but on the output, the environmental inputs needed to create, I guess on a per pound basis, have you analyzed that?
Not in a huge amount of detail, other than the fact that a lot of the existing workflows are very energy intensive. So not in terms of physically quantifying the number of kilowatts or the total process, but just in broad sweeping terms, you can assume that if you're going to have to use a rotovap to size reduce 1,000 liters of extract down to a few liters of concentrate, that's going to be very energy expensive. You're probably going to have to do similar type of process to recover that ethanol if you're going to be reusing it. So you don't want to have that reagent be an expensive reagent that you just discard after every run. You want to recycle it. So again, energy intensive. I'm assuming that HVAC is going to be a big issue in either direction of process, because you're going to have to control the environment very carefully, not just on a C1D1 perspective, but also just making sure that you're not overheating the environment and burning off the useful ingredients that you're looking for.
Ian, can you help us? I could bring some panelists. I like to bring all the players together in this field. Maybe we'll see who's emperor's not wearing clothes, but let's see. You're obviously you're nuanced on this, so I'd welcome that. Maybe you can get a distribution deal out of the whole thing. So
yeah, I would say that if you can try and keep heat out of the process, it's going to be important to reduce the costs. If you can automate it, you can actually increase the throughput and therefore use energy during off cycle. So instead of trying to have it, if you're using the energy in the middle of the night, you can do so and then reduce the burden on the grid, for example.
Interesting.
I'd have to think about it. Maybe we'll take that offline and we'll have a further discussion. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Any other questions from any of the participants?
Yes. Ian, you had mentioned the use of Rotovap. At what step would you be using the Rotovap?
So what we're considering is actually eliminating the Rotovap step right at the end of extraction. So if you're doing small extractions, there's not a huge amount of ethanol or post-winterized supercritical CO2 ethanol that needs to be removed. But when you start to scale the process into the thousands of liters, especially in the large volume processors of outdoor grow or CBD grow, when you're dealing with 1,000 liters of ethanol, you have to bring that ethanol volume down before it would go into next steps. And so if we can capture it, you could just use it as a replacement for the Rotovap. So you would capture it on the polymer, remove it from the high volume, release it into a small volume, and then use that to the next step, if that's a purification step for individual cannabinoids, for example.
Got it. Thank you.
I have one question for Jennifer. What is the QC or your primary QC analysis? Because I understand that for sustainability's sake, the homogenization process and accepting as much as possible and using various parts of the plants. But what are you verifying and checking? Very curious. What makes it through and what doesn't?
Yeah, it's a good question. And honestly, something that we're continually updating, right? I imagine that if you asked me this question 8 months from now, it would probably be a little bit different than what I say today. But what we're doing, we call it characterization. So we take in the plant and we test each sample when it comes in. We're testing for metals. We never want heavy metals. That probably is the number one thing that we just can't have. And sometimes that comes in so many different ways that you just have no idea. The soil, the content of the soil, the metals in the soil, it comes in, just in a bunch of different ways that we can't control. So we're often looking for that metallic content. There are, some producers that are using just, contaminants, right? They're using pesticides and things like that. If we were being picky and choosy at the moment, we likely would not use a lot of material that had been heavily treated with pesticides. And those are probably the top two things that we're looking for. Outside of that, we're trying to be very generous about what we're able to take in. And what we will likely do is start to once we're able to split, we've got premium material that we don't need to do a lot to treat. And then we have, maybe sub or less than premium that we would take more careful steps to to treat and during, to treat and make sure that it's, it's after it's been characterized, if it's not optimal or premium, that we take more wash steps. Like that material might go through 2 or 3 more wash steps, or 2 or 3 more, kind of enzyme baths, things like that. And then I would say the last thing there really is just to continue testing at each step. Our QC basically requires us at each step, before it moves on to a new phase in our process, you've got another test that has to happen. And so far that has been really helpful. And it also helps us take out any material that is somehow reactive to any of the treatment that we do. So even if we characterize it first and then it reacts in a way that we don't like, we can pull that out of the chain. And also keeping it quarantined, at least in the early stages, so that there's not a lot of mixing. And a lot of times, we are able to, just kind of in the early stages, just you'd be surprised just that the visual check makes a difference. A lot of the way that we're shipped goods or shipped material, it becomes moldy, just that visual touch and feel, all of your senses being involved makes a big difference, and that is just kind of the common sense part of the process. So.
That was a great answer. Thank you very much. And I wish you, it's a great project, and I wish you best of luck. And eventually, hopefully, the purifications process become efficient enough that you can remove the metals and pesticides and accept all of it, because that'll be the best thing for the people and the planet.
For sure. And when we talk about recycling material that's kind of waste stream of an already existing manufacturing process, for example, in the beer manufacturing process, you've got spent grains that are just, left over from the normal steps that they've taken in manufacturing. Those, the spent materials or the waste streams from an existing manufacturing process are sometimes a little bit more premium, because they've already been vetted through the normal QC steps that are taken for that product that you would have been initially consuming, that this is a waste stream of. So like I was talking about with the juices and, with spent grains from beer, or with leftover, the leftover plant material. Maybe let's say you're shucking pineapples and you've got all these, pineapple skins and carcasses left over, a lot of that's already been characterized, so that helps as well.
Fantastic.
And I know you mentioned that, the HVAC would be really important, and, kind of the setting and the just kind of controlled environment, that's something that's really important to us as well. And we're constantly having to update and shift on. Are you all consulting or leaning on what you see from a lot of other existing industries? Because that's a lot of what we're doing. How is this being handled in, let's say, paper manufacturing, or how is this QC, or how is this, controlled environment being handled in, already pre-existing industries? What are you all looking to as guidance there?
Well, I think one of the challenges you're going to see, and we're going to see, is going to be how we keep product that's coming in as GACP inputs becoming EU GMP in terms of how it's being dried, how it's being cured, how it's being set up to grow. Then it's going to go through all of its natural process in a GMP compliant manner. So you'll be able to track that for each of the different suppliers. So you'll know how they've handled it. What you may not know is exactly how they handled the rest of that biomass, because that biomass, it might have been, one of my concerns is that heavy metal piece that you were talking about, is that's going to be accumulating at the lower quadrant. That lower foot is going to be where most of those heavy metals come. So how are you going to actually test that soil? How are you going to be able to assess that they've done their process to make sure that they don't have heavy metals, because they may not see it in the flour?
Yep. The heavy metals, like you said, it's a big part of making sure that what we're vetting, that we don't get a lot of that. And so it'll just be a continued kind of back and forth. And also, I think for us, at least as our relationships deepen with the partners that we're taking in input material from, it gives us more opportunities to do further analysis. And like I said, I think a little bit earlier, to make updates in their methodology and the ways that they go about production and cultivation, to see if that can help make those reductions. But yeah, it is something that's of genuine concern for us. And as much as we, that lower part of the plant will touch, and have a little bit more likelihood to have the heavy metals, a lot of the waste that we're seeing is still just, parts of the plant, like the leaves and the stems that don't even get down to kind of the roots and the stalks just yet. And so I think most people will be genuinely surprised how just the sheer mass of material that is just discarded. Things that you would probably be surprised that no one can use, are actually being discarded. So a lot of times we'll probably have a lot of content or plant material biomass to use before we even have to start, creeping further down the chain of looking at the roots and the stalks that sit in, that are a little bit closer to touching the soil, like you said.
There's going to be some competition that comes about from the cattle industry because of silage. Whoop, we've lost you.
Yeah, you're right. A lot of it is used as feed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or bedding.
Mostly in the hemp, not so much in the cannabis. I doubt very much cannabis leftover plant material will be used as feed, but
you never know. It depends on the rules.
And a lot, like Ian is saying, a lot of just leftover waste material in the food space is used that way, particularly in beer. That those spent grains are often used for cattle resources. So,
does anyone here know? You mentioned cattle, benzites. That ring a bell for anyone? ZAITZ.
I'll have to look that one up. Do you want to give a little background?
He is he's third generation, maybe fourth in ag, and he crosses over. He has grass-fed cattle. I want to say 30,000, moving to 80,000. He's got potato farms across the country. He also owns High Times and some other. He's in the cannabis field in lots of ways, and I'd like to get him into this. He has a certain.
Be an interesting discussion for sure. Yeah. Because there is some early data, very, very preliminary, where one group in Saskatchewan were using silage as a means of stabilizing cannabinoids that were just going to rot and go away. They were trying to put it into an anaerobic environment by making it into silage, which is a really interesting twist. Whether that's commercially viable, who knows, but it would definitely be a conversation.
And I think Ian should be part of our future of work series. He sees the landscape.
Ian could be part of so many things. I try not to pull him into too many.
Thanks.
I call him Doc Ian because he's got 2 PhDs, so I throw the doc in there.
There's only one person I'm comfortable calling me Doc, and she's 80, and she's lovely.
I actually have to run on to another meeting, so but this can continue in terms of a conversation. But really, just wanted to highlight a few things in terms of the things we went over today. There's so many areas to do deeper dives into that I think. Mark, I wasn't sure if you were on earlier when I was mentioning this, but we will likely do like a quarterly series on technology and cannabis.
I was gonna tell you the quarterlies, it's like dog years. I don't know why we're waiting.
Well, we do monthly events on cannabis, but I don't want to do every event on tech and cannabis. So we've got also a women leaders in cannabis event coming up. So Jennifer, I might reach out to you as well on that. We're trying to figure out the date, and Darla from our team is going to coordinate that. And then, there's so many areas of cannabis to cover, but I think technology is going to be a recurring theme. So at least once a quarter.
And by the way, we're doing an event on September 24th at Ann Arbor, the University of Michigan's Tech Transfer Office. It's going to be like their best of. And then the next, actually, Harbaugh is going to be joining it for a block. I'd just be curious also from the universities through the Midwest, because I will be in Ohio, and I will be with Lieutenant Governor. I'm also curious if they might look at the tax agenda for going rec, but I'm also just curious for the universities. are coming up with. Like the synthetic bio that I saw was out of MIT. Actually, we're on the cap table. It's called Manus Bio. But but yeah, I'm just curious with these technologies at deep tech, where it's going. And I think you would have a point of view on that, Ian. Maybe others here too.
I think there's some really interesting tech that's going to start showing up in smart agriculture with regard to drone use, satellite use, for the ability to figure out when plants are going to be infected, when they need nutrients, when they don't need nutrients, when they're burning, when they're not burning. That is going to be really exciting tech, because it'll mean that the farmers will actually be able to assess their crops before the problems happen rather than after. I think there's areas there, there's automation areas when it comes to, oh gosh, there's so many to talk about.
Hey, Ian, I got a question for you before I wrap it up. When you speak of full spec, are you including Delta 8? You know, and what are your thoughts on that as a compound? You know, I'm on the East Coast here in North Carolina, and of course CBD is on the books. You can buy it at every smoke shop around the corner, and Delta 8 now is also the case. You know, but there's definitely been rumblings that may not be. But I would love to kind of hear your perspective on that. And then, you know, I don't know what those two doctorates are, but if it's one of them is scientific, and you could speak a little bit on how Delta 8 kind of reacts with kind of the receptors that we're traditionally familiar with, you know, CB1, CB2. I would love that education as well.
Well, Delta 8, as my understanding of it, and that's as limited only because I haven't actually worked on Delta 8, is actually a byproduct of a Lewis acid. So basically, if you take CBD and you treat it with an acid, about a third of it remains CBD, about a third of it turns to Delta 9 THC, and about a third of it turns into Delta 8. So it's a way of taking the inexpensive CBD and converting it into a more expensive, more marketable product, because you can make THC out of it, Delta 9. It doesn't do anything for, so that process, if you take that third of the Delta 8, you can then sell that. It's less psychotropic than Delta 9, but it's also a product that comes about from CBD, which is why the the DEA is getting involved, is because it is psychotropic. It's just not as potent on the CB1 receptor as Delta 9 is. It's just less, but it still has that effect. So in terms of isolation of Delta 8, you can capture it, but it's an artificial synthesized product from CBD. In terms of, is it going to be safe? Is it going to be appropriate? It's going to have similar effect to Delta 9, except you'll just have to take more of it to have the psychotropic effects. It may actually be an interesting product to be determined, because where Delta 9 would actually have effects in indications, such as pain or spasticity and multiple sclerosis, you might find that Delta 8 has similar effect and doesn't get you quite so high. So if you're using it for microdosing, or if you're using it in a medicinal context, Delta 8 may actually be a better choice if you're trying not to be high.
Do you see DEA jumping in and regulating that sooner than later?
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's already started.
Yeah.
I'd like to just add one thing to that. Ian, I agree with you. I've kind of worked with Delta 8 for 4 or 5 years now. The Delta 8 in its isolated form, there's obviously no sound scientific data on this, but anecdotally myself, probably a few hundred people that I've dosed, it seems very well and very, very plausible. The issue that I see right now, and why perhaps why DEA is jumping on it, is the manufacturing process of it, and the byproducts that are being produced in that process. And there's a lot of peaks that are showing up on the chromatograms, and you know how that goes. We cannot identify them. We have no idea what they are. So for the sake of just Delta 8, I think it's actually a great product. But once it's in its isolated form and, added back, kind of like the pharma model that we talked about earlier. But currently how it's done, it's a bit scary.
Yeah.
And Jay, how do you describe the effects, whether they be, not making claims on, but, is it an anti-inflammatory? Is it a regenerative? What have you seen, or what do you describe it as?
I typically get less anxiety from Delta 8 than I do from Delta 9, but I've stopped consuming Delta 8 as of quite some time now because cannot verify the byproducts. I mean, I look at the chromatograms and the labs have no idea what this is. There's all these different things popping up in there. But actually, Robert, my teammate, he's been consuming Delta 8, so I'll let him speak on that.
Okay, give it to us, Robert.
Yeah, particularly in combination with low doses of THC, I find it to be, as Jay said, quite calming, a little bit floaty, and a really nice complement to the THC. But I think most importantly, it's nice mind and body is that lack of anxiety. And I don't have a high tolerance. So I'm combining like 2 to 3 milligrams of D8 with the same amount of THC as an example. And I'm not getting the, as I refer to it, scaries that I can often get with THC alone.
So it's kind of akin to how, early people, the ratios, THC to CBD, people are kind of trying to moderate and find that. So D8 could almost be a moderator for 9. Interesting. We entered the
also an enhancer at the same time.
As well, yeah, because most people love my tolerance for 9 is fine, and I just kind of, but people who are using 8 here that are, don't particularly use cannabinoids, they definitely are feeling the psychotropic components of it, and so, we kind of initially sold CBD as that kind of glass of wine, type of ease. And I don't think for most it provides that. And now you're kind of making me seem that 8 maybe goes a little bit too far. So, finding that consumer spot, I think that's what's going to unlock a lot of the value in the space that we're all participating of, consumers finding formats and formulations that fit their needs, and as your product does, Robert, I dig that, giving them the ability to customize, personalize, find your zone, be creative, all the above. Is going to be a part of the forwarding of the space, so.
Appreciate that.
Yeah.
We might have lost our moderator in regards to Anand and Mark. Oh, there he is.
I mean, I don't see Anand though.
I think he had to leave.
By the way, it's so refreshing not to be the lead. But yeah, I'm always, my question is like, what should we do next? And obviously we've identified some of those areas, and Anand's really great, so he'll follow up on all this. But if you have other ideas or questions, feed them to us. And yeah, my mind's a little bit on Ohio. If anybody's going to be in Ohio, Cincinnati tomorrow, Columbus Thursday, and Cleveland. Or people. It'll be our first that are in prep. We're actually going to have a little 15-minute streaming segments that sort of do the hybrid while we're out there. But if you know anybody, in fact, I can flash on the screen our schedule. Just ping us. You'll see us at our LinkedIn events or other events. You just go to 361firm.com/Ohio. You'll see everything. That'll be it's good to get all the protocols. I guess they're all shifting tomorrow. It's really interesting. That'll be fun.
Well, Mark, another fantastic event, and the panel, Ian and Robert, I've heard Robert before. That was great. I do work with Jennifer, and so I look forward to, as we all know, it's going to take all of us to create, this industry to, the foundations. And again, Mark, it's great to always get connected with thought leaders and those moving it. And so I will look forward to connecting with everybody at a later date. And Mark, you always talk about kind of the organic development of panels. You know, as my load gets a little bit lighter, I would love to work with people like Ian and Jay and Robert and Jennifer and yourself to dial in some of these topics that maybe lead to some of these manifestations that help industry, help individual entities, you know, help investors a little bit more actively.
Very cool.
I'll keep you to that.
Cedric. There it is. All right, everybody, be well.
Have a good one.
Indeed. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Seeing as Zach and let's just come back here in a 30 seconds. I have to end the Zoom in order to